Hi, how are you? So today I am making another English video, and it is not a trans-related video, it's about something entirely else. So if you follow my channel regularly, you may have noticed that I've uploaded a song recently that I wrote about World War II. And I will upload this video right here on May 8th, which is the day that World War II ended on European ground. It lasted a bit longer in other parts of the world, and the war then officially ended for the rest of the world in September of '45, but May 8th marks the day that it ended here. Why do I want to talk about this? Well, as most of you may know, I live in Austria. I am Austrian, and Austria played a very huge role in World War II. And I've actually been asked by people from the US and from other countries how I, as an Austrian, feel about all that happened back then. And I have to say, it is a topic that hits pretty close to home for me, quite literally. Adolf Hitler is always being linked to Germany, but what some people don't know is that Adolf Hitler was actually not German, he was Austrian. He was born in Austria. He was born in the same federal state that I grew up in Upper Austria, and he actually went to school in the same city that I went to school in, which was the city of Linz. And secondly, my grandparents, who've all passed away a long time ago. My last grandmother passed away 11 years ago. They were pretty old. They were in their 40s when they got my parents, and my parents, again, were close to, between 30 and 40 when they got me. So even though I'm only 26, I had pretty old grandparents. My grandmother was born in 1920, so she was 18 or 19 when the war started, and I had a lot of relatives who actually lived through World War II. As far as I know, none of my relatives that I know of were ever in the SS or in any way involved with the Nazi Party itself. But both of my grandfathers fought in the war because every male citizen, when you reached a certain age, was drafted automatically and had to fight in the war. During the war, a lot of terrible, terrible things happened. About 80 million people died worldwide in the war. People were killed in battle. People were hit by bombs. Entire cities were destroyed by bombing. People starved to death because there was no food anymore. But probably the worst thing that happened in World War II was, of course, the Holocaust, where about 6 million Jewish people were killed by the Nazis in the so-called concentration camps, where they were put in gas chambers. Why did this happen, you may ask? Well, basically, Hitler and his followers, they believed in this really, really crazy theory called raciology. That theory is not something that Hitler made up himself. It existed before, and a lot of people believed in that theory at the beginning of the 20th century. That theory basically says that there are different races of people. Like, there's the German race, and there's the African race, and the Jewish race, which are determined by things like skin color, hair color, eye color, body height, and the German race, in Hitler's eyes, meant 100% German people who were tall, had blonde hair, blue eyes. He would measure people's faces, how long their noses were, and how far apart their eyes were to determine if they were really true Germans or not. What Hitler's plan originally was to make the German race the one race that would rule over the world. So he invaded all these other countries in order to expand the German Reich, and in order to make Europe and eventually the rest of the world be ruled by the German race. And at the same time, within his own country, within the German Reich, he wanted to eliminate the people who he thought threatened the German race. And that was the Jewish race, because people back then had this belief that Jewish people were guilty of everything that went wrong. Nazis actually thought that Jewish blood was kind of poisonous, and if a German woman, for example, would marry a Jewish man, he would then poison her blood. And in order to keep the German blood clean and to get rid of everyone who could poison this race, he killed them by the millions, which is a very crazy theory. I actually get goosebumps when I think about it. I guess nowadays, most of us, at least I hope, find that this is totally insane and just crazy and bad. So the question is, why did so many people in Germany and Austria, which then belonged to Germany, just stand by and let this happen and let those people get killed? There were concentration camps everywhere. People lived nearby concentration camps. They saw people being brought there by the thousands and never getting out. They saw the smoke coming out of the chimneys as they burned the dead bodies. Why did no one, or at least very few people, do anything about that? Why didn't they rise? Why didn't they try to stop Hitler and his party from doing what they were doing? And I guess that is a question that will always kind of weigh on our minds. How could we, I wasn't born yet, but how could our ancestors just stand by and not do anything about this? I think there are two reasons for that. Firstly, people were scared. Hitler would not only kill Jewish people, he would also kill people who stood up and said anything against the Nazis. There were spies everywhere. Your neighbor, your aunt, that guy from down the street, they could be Nazis, and people were reported. You know, if you said anything against Hitler and someone heard that and reported it, you were also deported to a concentration camp and killed. And that's why most people just stayed silent out of fear for being killed, for losing their family members, for being brought to a concentration camp. There are a lot of stories of people who actually did help in small ways. They would hide Jewish people in their basements. They would, do small things. And some of them were caught and killed, and some of them got away with it. But, of course, if you have a family and you have children to look after, you will probably stay quiet and just hope that nothing will happen to you and your family, which is understandable, I think. And the second reason, because there were the bystanders who just didn't open their mouths out of fear, and then there were people who really supported Hitler. How did that happen? In the beginning, when he was rising to fame, basically, as a politician, people had nothing. Most people had lost everything in the financial crisis. People lost their homes. They were living on the street. One loaf of bread cost like 10,000 shillings back then, which nobody could afford because there was inflation and money wasn't worth anything. So people were starving. There weren't any jobs. And then along came Hitler, and he promised them work. He promised them food. He promised them everything. The flame was ignited, kind of, and people were looking up to him. And the thing that happened, war may be something very bad on a human level. But war is actually good for the economy because you have to make weapons, prepare for war, and those are jobs. And Hitler actually provided a lot of jobs. And at the beginning of the war, Austria and Germany were rising from the ashes. People suddenly had jobs, they suddenly had food, suddenly everything was great. In the beginning, they did not realize the terrors that were to come in the later years of the war. I mean, under Hitler's reign, the Olympic Games were held in Germany, and the eyes of the world were on Germany. There were parades, and there were great buildings, and cities expanded, and everything was huge, and everyone was thinking, what, our economy is just getting so much better suddenly. And that's why Hitler became this kind of hero to people. And one other thing that you must never underestimate was his propaganda. He was a specialist in propaganda. He knew exactly what people wanted to hear, and he told them just that. And he had a lot of propaganda experts in his ranks, people like Goebbels, who was his propaganda minister, and who held some very, very famous speeches. And they knew exactly how to manipulate people. And they knew that if they gave people a common enemy, someone that people were uniting to fight against, they would win people. Hitler made the Jewish people the enemy of the Germans. Unfortunately, that is something that works. It works very, very well until today. We now have other right-wing populist parties who are using the Syrian refugees that are coming to our countries and making them the bad people who want to take everything away from us. In most European countries, right-wing parties are rising because they are using the same propaganda mechanisms that Hitler used with the Jews, which is something that is very dangerous and something that must not be underestimated in any way. I'm absolutely sure that no human being is totally immune to that kind of propaganda. We can all be brainwashed, and if people use the right words and hit us in the right spot, we can be manipulated easily. So we are not immune to that, and I think that's something that we always have to keep in the back of our minds. The last thing I wanted to address is how do Austrian people talk about and feel about World War II nowadays? It is something that is constantly shoved in our faces. When I was in 8th grade, the entire year of 8th grade history class was only about World War II. And there is a concentration camp, a former concentration camp, only about an hour from where I am right now. That was the concentration camp of Mauthausen, where a lot of Jewish people were killed in gas chambers and through hard labor. And we actually went on a field trip to Mauthausen and were kind of force-fed video footage of dead bodies that were found by the Americans when they freed that concentration camp. There was another concentration camp near where I live, which was the Castle of Hartheim, where the Nazis killed people with disabilities. We had to watch every war movie, starting with Schindler's List, you name it. We had to watch a lot of World War II movies. And probably the most interesting thing that we had to do was interview contemporary witnesses. I'm lucky that I'm old enough to still have known some people who were alive during World War II. I remember that back then for school, I interviewed 3 people, my grandmother and 2 of my aunts. And 2 of the 3 people I interviewed are already dead. There is only 1 aunt left that lived during that time period. I mean, the war ended over 70 years ago, and in a matter of a couple of years, I don't think there will be any contemporary witnesses left. So future generations may not be able to talk to those people and to listen to their experiences. Talking to these people was incredible in a way. Things that they went through, how scared they were. My grandmother was a teacher. She was never a supporter of the system, but of course she was also forced to teach children a certain, outlook on life. They had books, school books that were printed by the Nazis, and that had things in them like The Dangerous Jew and stuff like that. It was force-fed. Even to the children, everything had this information in it. Every children's book, every children's toy, everything that people grew up with. Just the things that those people told me, how my aunt and her family caught the last train from Germany to Austria in order to get away from the bombings, and they were running across this field where there were a lot of landmines that were blowing up around them, and my aunt was only 10 years old or something. And then they got on the train, and then the train was shot at, and a lot of people on the train died, and they were hiding somewhere underneath the seats, and people around them were dead and stuff like that, and she was only 10 years old at the time. And I think it's just crazy what those relatives of mine went through and what those people went through. A lot of them were guilty of being part of that National Socialistic idea, and a lot of them were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, I guess. I have very strong feelings about it. I just hope that nothing like this will ever happen again. We should have learned from this. We should have learned that it is not right to discriminate against someone just because they're from a different country or have a different religion. It's something that caused so much pain and so many terrible things, and I just hope that nothing like this will ever happen again. I feel really bad for everything that happened, even though I had nothing to do with it. I wasn't even born yet, but I still feel like it kind of makes me question things that people that I knew, people that I've met, old people, were alive during that time, and part of that, in a way, even though they weren't actively, standing behind those ideas of Hitler, but they were still, kind of quiet bystanders, if you know what I mean. Yeah, I guess this was a very long video, and I've no idea if that was of any interest to you at all, but that was my 2 cents on World War II. I will see you soon with more videos, some in German, some in English, and just stay tuned. Until next time. Bye.